Hello, everyone. We're live. I'm Jeremy Webb. I am Artistic Director of Neptune Theatre. Welcome to Wednesday evening. I hope you're doing well. I hope staying safe. I hope everyone around you is well and doing safe as well. Off the Leash is Neptune Theatre's way of staying in touch with our audience, with our friends, with our colleagues, not only in Nova Scotia, but across the country. I hope you're doing okay. Before I moved to this country, way back in 1990, I'm going to say 96, I was at dinner with some Canadians who we were talking about the fact that I was contemplating at some point in the future moving to Canada. And over dinner, I think it was in Bristol in the UK, one of the gentlemen at the dinner said, well, you know, if you come to Halifax to live, you'll want to work at Neptune Theatre. Look what happened. And if you work at Neptune Theatre, you're going to want to meet and work with Walter Borden. And I said, oh, great. Who's Walter Borden? Little did I know. And he proceeded to regale me with stories about Neptune Theatre and Walter Borden. I have since 24 years after that conversation, had the good pleasure of working with Walter Borden, and I'm very thrilled. In fact, I've been waiting for this for a couple of weeks now, that I managed to persuade Walter to come on this show and have a conversation with me. And let's bring him in now. Neptune audiences and theater audiences around the country will know him so well. Please welcome Walter Borden to the studio. Hi, Walter.
Hi, Jeremy.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Oh, and first off, I always check in with my guests and find out, during this pandemic, how you're doing. With now, when I first started doing that a couple of months ago, none of us really knew how long this was going to last. We still don't know. But it seemed like such a good question. So, but I will ask, how are you doing, and where are you? Where are you holed up during this time?
Well, I'm holed up right here in Halifax.
Oh, good.
And I've been here since the end of March, really. I just kept extending the time because I kept an eye on how things were progressing or not progressing in Toronto. And I had just made up my mind, since I was east anyway when everything shut down. I was in New Brunswick, rehearsing for Driving Miss Daisy with Jenny Mundy.
Right.
And I decided that I would come to Nova Scotia because I had planned on coming down after we had finished rehearsal.
Right.
So just after I got here, the day after I got here, that's when they closed the borders and carried on. And I was content. I said, fine, because I just felt that it would be far more sensible for me to wait this out in Halifax than it would be in Toronto. So here I still am. And like I say, I keep my eye on how things are going. If they take a step forward and they take 10 steps back and they carry on like this. So it'll probably be several more weeks yet, but that's fine because I had other things to technically do while I was here. So here I am.
Here you are. I think you made, well, I think certainly looking at how we are faring right now in flattening that curve compared to Toronto, at least. It's so sad and unfortunate, and I hope they catch up soon. But certainly, I think you made the right choice.
For me, it was the logical choice. But strangely enough, there were many other things that, and some very significant ones, that sort of tied in with being here,
Right.
having to do with projects, a couple projects that I am in the middle of completing, and also a couple of projects that have yet to be, that we really required what's happening to me now, which is just to be able to be where it all started for me, it's like going to in-house work.
Yeah.
And to do that, I had to reacquaint myself with the place. So I've done a lot of thinking and a lot of remembering things, facilitate these projects that I am doing. So yeah, it's strange in that way that I am aware of what everybody else has to do in order to make their way through this particular time,
Yeah.
and I watch what they're doing, and I find that very fascinating also. But for me personally, it's a boon.
Right. Being here right now.
Yeah,
So yeah, so you grew up in New Glasgow.
that it did.
You did,
Yeah.
and that word I'm almost I don't. It's one of those things. I want to say you grew up in New Glasgow. When was that? But that seems so rude, and I don't want to be.
No, because part of the projects that I'm talking about is actually the writing of 3 books, and one covers from 1942 to 1960.
Right.
And so I've been having to think a lot about that, and it's the ideal question to ask because it is the foundation of everything I am, and there's not 1 second between 1942 and 1960 in New Glasgow that that I do not realize that each one was so vital, and I remember it all. Thank God I still have my brains, but I do remember it. It was
I know when we were chatting just before coming on air, you were mentioning specific dates of specific productions, and I must admit, I was sitting here going, I don't remember a production, the year of a show I did just a few years ago. So you do have that. So now when you are here in Nova Scotia, and I know that you were mentioning that you have made Toronto your base for a while now, since the early 2000s, but this is still the place.
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt.
Yeah. Do you actually spend time in New Glasgow? Do you still have what's your family situation like still in Nova Scotia? I'm assuming you have
almost virtually all of my family, except for a few brothers and sisters, are still here in Nova Scotia, and a lot in family in New Glasgow. So I get down to New Glasgow. I always intend to go down to New Glasgow every time I come here, but it never works out that way. Last year when I was down here doing Noises Off, after I finished that, I went down to New Glasgow.
Right.
And it had been, I don't know, years since I had been there. Strange.
Yeah.
And walking in New Glasgow, and that is a place I have to go there.
Yeah.
To work partly on one of these projects that I'm doing, because I have to walk those streets. I have to walk Vale Road. I have to be there.
Yeah. Could you take me back, if you don't mind? Paint a picture of 10-year-old Walter Borden. I'm assuming you were in New Glasgow at that point, but or a young Walter Borden in New Glasgow. What were you like as a child? Because I've only met you and worked with you in the last few years, and I've known of you for the last 20 years, and I've seen you work so many times now, and so I have an image. And when you speak, every word that you say, we listen to, and you're a very thoughtful man, and that's amazing. I wonder, was that you when you were a kid too, or did that come later in life? What was 10-year-old Walter like, and how was that?
10-year-old Walter, in the scheme of things that we're talking about here, is old for me. I remember the Walter of 18 months.
Ah.
Very clearly, very clearly. And that was during the war, of course. My mother used to sit me on an old porcelain tub that was outside our house. And, you know, it was a big thing, so she would prop me up and I wasn't about to fall off. And I can remember sights and sounds because the army barracks was a few miles away from our neighborhood. And the soldiers would have to march down the road past our place through the neighborhood in order to get to the train station, to get the train to go to Halifax and get on the convoys and head out over to Europe. I remember the sound of the marching. I remember the sight of the men marching. The reason I remember it so well is because there was something that really bothered that little child, and it was the color of the uniforms. I didn't even know what the color was. I just know I didn't like that color. That
Right.
did something to me. And also, I think it did because it stayed with me, and even a few years later, it's still there because there was no color in anything. Because in comic books and things like that, from my remembrance of a couple of years later, when I'd be watching comic books, all the drawings were in black and white. And I remember when color came back into comic books, when color came back into the newspapers. That always stayed with me. It bothered me terribly. Everything was this khaki color, and that. But I remember that. I remember the quarantines.
Yeah.
Because of diseases, of course.
Right.
There were no vaccines for anything, and because our families were large in the community, and ours certainly was large, and when a disease hit the family, it went through everybody. And so therefore, you know, before I even started school, like virtually everybody else in the neighborhood, I had had red measles, German measles, whooping cough, scarlet fever, diphtheria, all of it.
Yeah.
But why I remembered it most was because this strange person used to arrive at the house and put this sign on the house. And I remember the hammer putting the big tacks in there. It was a quarantine sign so that no one could go in the house.
Oh, wow.
And they were all around the neighborhood. So connected with that, I got very used to hearing people talking to each other by yelling from porch to porch,
Right.
because people would be out in their own yards. Mothers, grandmothers would be putting clothes on the clothesline, and
Right.
the conversations would be yelled across the neighborhood. I remember that very well. Yes.
So I clearly, by saying, tell me about 10-year-old Walter, I should have gone straight for, tell me about 2-year-old Walter, because
oh yeah. But that was the beginning of what I was going to be like. The one who sat and was always observing from a distance,
mm-hmm.
from a distance. The only difference between the little kid sitting on the bathtub, and the child a few years later was that he had learned that there was a large meadow kind of place just across the lane, as we called it, a road that was not paved or anything, but we called it the lane. And I would go across into that area. We say going into the field. It was like a big meadow, going into the field. And there were blueberry bushes and whatever. And I used to go there in the evenings as soon as the weather got nice. And I would just lie there looking up, thinking. Now, there was the comfort of knowing that just across the lane, a 3-minute walk, was the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd hear the voices and the lights would be on and whatever, but I could be away still, and I would do my thinking, and that's I really did. When I think back on it now, I mean, I can understand why it was that in the neighborhood, and particularly in my family, and particularly with my mother, this child that was obviously strange was given complete latitude to be strange.
Yeah. How many siblings did you have? You said you had a large family, an immediate family.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, but there were 18 of us kids.
Right.
And I always say 20 because my mother and father raised 2 nephews of mine from infancy. So we were brought up like brothers. So I just say there were 20 of us and my mother and father.
Wow. Wow.
And in the midst of that, I could carve out this way of being in and away at the same time.
Yes.
I had no idea why I was doing it. It was just natural for me, although I was aware that it was not common.
Yeah. To want to be separate and have those blissful moments of reflection and thought in the field.
But my mother understood, so therefore I knew it was fine.
Right.
It was fine. She gave me total latitude. Total.
Yeah.
And even as a very young child, I was never they never found it necessary, or so it came across to me, to challenge me on anything I was thinking, anything I wanted to do, like, keeping an eye on kids in the evening and things like that. No, I was allowed. They knew that it would be all right. It would be all right.
And that was both parents were like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's good. Awesome. I want to. We could. I know that you and I could talk for a long time, and I feel like maybe we should have just not done a series, whole season. But I do want to move forward in time a little.
Oh yeah.
And talk about. So your family were activists, and so were you. Are you? And can you tell me about growing up in Nova Scotia, and when is it ingrained in you, or is it a path you choose to stand up and give voice and fight? How did that come about for you?
Well, it happened so naturally, and I didn't even think about it until many years later. But the people who were so influential on me. A relative, a cousin, Dr. Carrie M. Best. Dr. Best, whom everybody knows, was one of my first great mentors. Dr. Best had a program on CKEC called The Quiet Corner. And in that program on the radio, she would talk about things that were going on in the community, people who had done things. She would read poetry. She would play certain music and all that. So that's where I first got my foot in the door of classical music, of poetry, and she was a magnificent orator. And she was the one who trained me for my first oratorical contest when I was 11 years old, 1953. That's a very interesting thing. You'll hit on that. Also, there was my Uncle Bill, my mother's brother, who was very, very active in getting things into the community. We never had running water or anything like that. It was Uncle Bill who organized the community into getting that, and so many things. So I was watching all this, obviously as a child, and taking it in without even realizing I was taking it in. My father, who worked his whole life at the Standard Clay Products, shoveling 2 boxcar loads of coal into kilns, which eventually over the years ended up really being the thing that destroyed his health. But I learned in watching my father, I learned the way that he dealt with people. See, my mother and my father in that community were the 2 people to whom everybody came, children, teenagers, adults, for guidance in anything. That's what they did. My dad was very different from my mother in terms of how he handled it. My mother was contemplative and gentle. My father was stoic, very calm, would sit there and listen to you go on and on and on, and then would answer you in certainly 25 words or less, usually less.
Yeah.
And that was it. He expected you to know exactly what to do from that, and most people did. So I learned those 2 different ways of dealing with people. Learned them very well. But so in terms, he also was a voracious reader, which is phenomenal because my dad only went to grade 5.
Wow. Yeah.
My mother went to grade 6. But my mother, when her children started school, would work with them and their homework every evening. So we start out, say, with Wilfred in grade 1. Yeah. Wilfred would go grade to grade 2. Kurt started to school. So she would be working with Kurt, working with Wilfred. Now, when Wilfred got to grade 6, and there are now grades all the way back, from 1 to, we did that for years anyway. We ended up with someone in every grade from grade 1 to grade 12. Yeah. When Wilfred got to grade 6, he would now be ahead of her. Right. So he would teach her.
Yeah.
The next year he'd go to grade 7. She could help Kurt, who had moved into grade 6. This is how my mother learned.
Yes.
I got. Yeah. So my dad had, you know, started reading. He would read, loved history, particularly war history,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore was very quietly political. It blew my mind one day when I was all growing up. I went back home and we got into a conversation. We loved having those conversations. And I suddenly learned something. My father, my mother were members of the CCF, the forerunner of NDP,
Oh, yes.
at a time when, I mean, nobody in Pictou County was CCF. There they were. It so all of a sudden I understood, oh my God, this is where it comes from in me. I didn't realize that. And what it must have been to exercise that at a time when you're either liberal or conservative.
Mm-hmm.
In Pictou County, basically conservative.
Mm-hmm.
They were CCF. So that's socialist.
Yes.
And I said, okay, now things are starting to fall into place. This doesn't just happen. So in short, and then I add to that my dad's younger sister, Pearline.
Mm-hmm.
You will know Dr. Pearline Oliver.
Mm-hmm.
And Pearl, she was the first Black student to graduate from New Glasgow High School, the school from which I graduated. She married Uncle Billy Oliver, who naturally everybody recognizes. Well, he was a giant at that time in terms of education, civil rights, all that. So that was my background.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was there. It was there. I want to get on to then how theater and the art came into your life. And we've spoken about this a little, but I wanted to tell everybody else. But before we do that, let's take a pause because we've been getting a couple of messages. Folks, if you're watching, feel free. I know that, like me, you're probably sort of mesmerized listening to Walter, but if you want to ask Walter a question, if I have a chance later on, I will slip in some of your questions. We've had a few messages, which I'll bring up. Christopher Wilson, hello, dear Walter. I got to meet this tremendous man when I was 17 years old, and he sends love to you.
Oh, wow.
Sandy Mitchell, glad to see you looking so well, Mr. Borden. I've missed you on Neptune stage. Me too. And that's why we got him back very recently and hope to do it again. And Kat Evans, Walter, you're still so wonderful. Have you moved back to Halifax now? Well, and yes, I'm glad you enjoy the stories too. Thanks for watching, Kat. Now here's a longer one. I don't know whether it will fit on the screen. I've never had a, but it's covered us. But never mind. Natasha McClellan reminds us, and I agree, Natasha. Walter inspires so many artists. Please let me tell you the moment you inspired me. I attended an acting workshop you gave at the Liverpool International Theatre Festival many years ago, and you said something to this effect: if you are just entering the theatre profession, recognize that you are the weakest link in a chain that includes the likes of Shakespeare and Olivia, etc. Do everything you can to earn your place.
Yes.
Natasha says she's never forgotten it and often recalls it to keep herself going. So there we go.
I remember it well.
So if you have any questions for Walter, slip them in, and I'll try and get to them. So Walter, obviously I know that you've had a long history with Neptune, and I've been reading about and obviously know about your history with many theaters in Canada. I think many theaters, probably many regions claim you as their own, but I'm glad to hear that Nova Scotia has your heart. But when did theater first appear to you? Do you remember suddenly discovering this thing?
December 1953.
And you have a date. Of course you have an exact date. Yeah? Okay, good.
We were doing a Christmas show at Temperance Street School, New Glasgow. And the play was about about Christmas Eve in England of the 1800s, and I was the town crier who had to go around at the top of each hour, ringing a bell and saying 7 o'clock and all is well,
Mhm.
8 o'clock and all is well. Da, 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 da. And well, I had this, and I remember it so clearly. I came out on the stage, and sitting there in front of me was my mother,
Oh.
my Aunt Goldie, Aunt Booty, and Uncle Charlie. And I started saying my lines, and I was looking at the people and I was looking at them. And I saw first that there was a different way that they were looking at me than other people were, though everybody was, for some reason, just looking at that stage. What I saw in the eyes of these people whom I knew so well was that they seemed not to know who I was. They knew who I was, and yet they saw somebody different, even at that age of 11.
Mm.
And while I'm looking at them and saying my lines, I'm thinking, this is really big because they don't know who I am, and yet they know who I am. That means that I can make people, just by standing here and doing this, I can make them act in really strange ways. Now, ordinarily, that would have been enough for a little one to take in. But the next thing I thought was this. If I can do that to people that I know that well, that's big. That's powerful. And then the next part that I'm thinking was the most important part. And that was, I said to myself, if that's so, you have to be really careful about how you do this. Yeah. What was happening in that moment, and I had to analyze it down the road, and I had the words for what was going on at that moment. Those were my first steps into activism. Didn't even realize it. But not only into activism, but the first steps in combining my art with my mission. And from that moment on, even when I wasn't aware that it was happening, the activist side was developing parallel to the artistic. I'll give you an example of how it went to the next step. The next year, I was in grade 7, and they were auditioning for a play. And my English teacher told me she wanted me to audition for this. And I said, okay, did it. And I went out and I did my little thing. And then I had to go to the washroom. Now, when I came out of the washroom, which was on the stage, I had to walk behind the teachers who were sitting there, who were going to decide who was going to play the roles in the play. But there was a screen, and I could skirt behind the screen and they wouldn't see me, and I would just go on to my classroom. But as I was going past this screen, I heard one of the teachers say, well, yes, Walter gave the best reading there, but, well, it is the role of Santa Claus. And I knew exactly what she was saying. I knew exactly from the tone what was being said.
Hmm.
And so, following that, of course, I didn't get the role of Santa Claus. I was given this other little role. But I knew that, and I told no one, no one.
Right.
But I filed it. And because that never left, I could add it to other things in the file. Let me go back to a few years. I was 11 then. Go back to 6. I'm in grade 1. I come home from school. My mother is there. Her sister, Aunt Sadie, who lived in Truro, was also there with the lady for whom she worked, Mrs. Wilson, white lady. I came into the house and I was called into the living room. And I had to stand in the middle of the living room while this lady, Mrs. Wilson, touched my face. My hair was blonde then, and she ran her hands through my hair, and she looked at my eyes, and the blue eyes, and I was traumatized, but said nothing. As soon as I was allowed to, I went outside and I went underneath the front porch steps, the front steps of our house. I could go in there and look out and no one would see me there until they left. And I tell you that because whatever I went through at that moment flashed back when I listened to the teachers make their statement. Many years later, when I started writing my one-man show, I remembered that first encounter in grade 6. And there is a part in the show that says, I knew that there was something wrong the day I watched my living room become an auction block and heard those gentle voices that had always seemed protective, suddenly with urgency and ill-concealed pride command me to perform and earn the admiration of our poised and honored guest, who with due consideration and unmitigated awe bought the goods and called my honey hair, blue eyes, and mellow yellow presence a wonderment. I knew that there was something wrong and ran and hid beneath our front porch steps till she had gone, then took a box of crayons and filled with calm and hate, I hid the brown into my dresser drawer. I held the white into the fire and watched it melt. Poor little sick boy. So, the activism had started before I even knew what the word activism was, whatever.
Yeah.
But now I had stood on the stage and knew it wasn't that I'm going to be an actor ever. Because even when I got to the point where I could delineate how I wanted to be in the profession, I never wanted to be an actor. I always said I want to be an artist in the craft of acting.
Right.
There's a big difference. And so those are little points. My beginnings in both fields.
What took you, what inspired you then to get formal training as an actor? How did...
Well, over the years, I had done certain little things and all like that. when after I became a teacher, and I started my real teaching at the same time that I was introduced to the uh, uh, social activism on a big scale when Rocky and Joan arrived in Halifax in '65, and that just took me way down my activist road. And at the same time, a lady named Jenny Archibald, Jenny originally from New Glasgow too, Jenny was the artistic director uh, um, at Pawn Playhouse, Theatre Arts Guild. Jenny got in contact with me and wanted me to go and be part of the guild. Now, Theatre Arts Guild has an old and very, very well-established reputation. It certainly did that. It was a magnificent training ground. I didn't realize that until I was made aware of it when I started my big training at Circle and Square. But at Pawn Playhouse Theatre, we did everything. We did, Pinter and everybody.
Yeah.
It was quite a place. Did things like, Under Milkwood, great stuff. And so Jenny took me under her wing, and she would just give me these various roles to do. So I was doing this on the evening, teaching school during the day, working with Nova Scotia Project constantly. So everything was blending. And that's why I say there's another indication of how the activism and the artistic side went hand in hand forever. There was also another lady connected with the theater there, and everybody will know Evelyn Garvery. Oh, Evelyn was the mentor for all of us at that time. Bill will know well. Yeah, Evelyn was a great mentor for Bill. Bryden McDonald. Oh, Evelyn says to me one day that she wanted me to audition for National Theatre School. That was the first year that National Theatre School opened, so I did it. And the results came back where they said, didn't make the first cut, but you're top on the list for January, because usually at the end of the first semester there's always people that are leaving, and so well, that didn't happen. So the next year I auditioned again and got the same answer, and Evelyn said to me, well, don't worry about it, Lovey. She said, they're not doing Othello this year. I said, okay. And she said, if I were you, there's only one place I would go. And I said, where's that, Evelyn? She said, Circle in the Square. I never told Circle in the Square. She said she had just seen a play there. She had just seen the Trojan Women. That's where you have to go. So this is back now in 1967, see? So I'm in her office. We get a New York City directory, phone directory. Go down it, find Circle in the Square Theatre School. She said, no, we phoned. I get this gentleman on the line. His name was John Fenn. He was the director of the theater school, and we're talking away there, and it was wonderful. And he says, well, yes, can you come down for an audition this afternoon? And I said, well, no, because I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He says, where's that? I said, well, I explained where it was. He said, okay, well, can you come down next week? So I said, yes.
Yeah.
Donna went the next week, did the audition, was accepted, got a scholarship, came back. And no, that was Expo 67 year.
Yeah.
And here in Halifax, with the Nova Scotia Project, Quacha House, which was the youth wing of the project, we were preparing them to perform at the youth pavilion at Expo.
Mm-hmm.
And we got all the kids off the street, did a show, The government sponsored us, took us up there, drew the largest crowd at the Expo, at the youth pavilion. The largest crowd. It was great. It was wonderful. I left there, went down to New York from there.
So how old were you when you were at Circle in the Square then? When you left to go there?
That was a 67. I was now born very 25.
Okay.
And I arrived at Circle. Now, I guess it was just a typical way of being Nova Scotian. You go someplace, you're in this great big place, and you feel like the last person on the block. I mean, I'm standing there in my class. I have students from all over the world, and I'm from Nova Scotia. But they were magnificent. I didn't realize until after, because that's the way it always is. But I arrived at Circle at the same time of the Greek junta, at which time they threw all of the artists out of the country.
Ah.
Where did they land? New York.
Right.
There was a man at Circle, Jose Quintero, who was very, very famous and very well remembered, because Jose would bring in dissidents from all over. That was his thing. Well, now he had all these Greek artists there at this theater. And so I walked into that. The first production I ever saw there was Iphigenia and Olis. And Irene Papas was playing Clytemnestra. Michael Kakayanis was directing it. But my teachers were Milton Katselis, who later became famous in Hollywood, directing, Butterflies Are Free and all like that. Kakayanis had not only directed the previous year Trojan Women, but he was getting ready to direct Shoes of the Fisherman. He was huge. There was Madame Kiropoulos, who was there for voice. So many.
What was the school like? What was the philosophy of the school like? Were they I went to a theater school where back then, and I went to the theater school in the 90s, where they broke you down first and got all your habits out of you and created a blank canvas and then rebuilt you over a couple of years, and if you managed to survive that process, you were lucky, and then they threw you out and off you went. But what was it like at Circle in the Square? Was it in any way like that, or
no?
Oh,
and that was the big thing, because I see that in so many theater schools.
Yeah.
What they did, they took what was there in front of them.
Yeah.
You, having recognized that you had this something, and they, through the material that you were given to perform, they just it's like it was like being taught in a home. You're going to encounter this in life. You're going to encounter that in life. How do you feel? Da, 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 da. I always called it, they made me feel when I was in front of them as if I was dealing with the earth. You were so solid. And a perfect example of that would be anyone who watched uh, Anthony Quinn's performance as Zorba.
Mm-hmm.
That was that was the whole thing about the school. You were like you were you were trained to be like Zorba,
Yeah.
dance, but you can't dance unless it's coming from that place.
Right.
And you will know when you're there because you will dance without you even know you're dancing. And for me, knowing nothing about this, just that this was the ideal way that I needed to be approached. It was perfect for me.
Mm.
I remember the first time I watched Irene Pappas enter stage as Clytemnestra. It was a theater in the semi-round with two vaughns, and I was seated beside one of the vaughns. And I'm literally mesmerized by what I'm watching on stage. What's on stage at that particular time was the Greek chorus moving. And what they had done is that the Greek chorus was made up of professional dancer actors.
Mm-hmm.
And so the movement was electrifying, melded with the words. And I'm glued to this. And I'm sitting there. And all of a sudden, it was like somebody took a giant something and just scratched down my back. You know, and you get that same feeling that you get when you used to hear nails on a blackboard,
Yeah.
and you just wrenched like this,
Yeah.
and that wouldn't have that would have been strange enough. But it's out of my eye. I see other people do the same thing at the same time around me. And I just happened to turn to my right, and standing right there so that I could look her right in the eye was Irene Pappas, ready to make her entrance as Clytemnestra. And the thing that blew my mind was that, I mean, she was totally concentrated, but her eyes were like the size of silver dollars. And I, I had, I did it automatically as an actor. Later, I never do that, but I had to. It pulled me over the side, trying to look into these eyes that were so huge. And I did. I got one, and it was like looking into the farthest reaches, way off somewhere. And this woman was just giving off these electric things. That, for me, was the apex of theater.
Yeah.
And it has always remained the standard point for me. I can't help it. I mean,
No.
I've seen all kinds of theaters since, but I automatically go there, and I wait to be hit that same way. Rarely have I been. But my aim as a performer was to arrive at a point where I could do that. That's what it was all about for me.
So when you left New York when you leave there, do you leave with a piece of paper? Are you graduate? Are you now
Well, see,
do you?
what happened was this, that while I'm going through this, after a year there, they said, John called me into the office and he says, Walter, listen, you really should be on the boards. Okay. Now he said, go on out there, do auditions, get auditions, whatever. You can come here for classes anytime you want. Tune-ups, da. Now, the big theater, black theater in New York at that time was the Negro Ensemble Company. They had just had their humongous hit with The Blacks by Jean Genet. And it was the birthplace for so many of the great black performers that I could name. I mean, James Earl Jones was in it. These are young now. James Earl Jones, Cicely Tyson, Godfrey Cambridge, Roscoe Lee Brown, um, Maya Angelou, all of them. That's where they started, in that play. And it was phenomenal. And so I go down to a black to the Negro Ensemble Company, look around and talk to people and whatever. But the only thing was this, that I was studying there as one labeled 1F because the draft was out. This was the time of the Vietnam War.
Right.
That's another story. Yeah. So therefore, the moment that I would leave the school to take a job, I would be 1A.
Oh, okay.
And eligible for the draft. Well,
Wow.
you know, Walter, and go, if I'm going to fight for anybody, it's going to be my own country. I'm not fighting for this country. It'd be raving crazy. So I came back to Canada.
Right.
Taught another year.
Right.
My last year of teaching. Then went to Vancouver.
Ah, okay.
Which would be by now 1970.
Yeah.
And that's when I made my professional debut.
What was the play?
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern I did.
Oh, okay.
And did it in also with Othello. That's when Nicky Littman and I first met each other. We were those together. Yes. So yeah, that was 50 years ago this year. But after being there, and of course that's another whole story.
Yeah.
But it was time. I needed to return. It was explained to me by some very nice people that I met, but it was like the ambience was all wrong. I was on the Pacific Ocean and I needed to be on the Atlantic because that's where I was from.
Yeah.
Very different oceans. And they really had an effect on me.
Yes. Yes.
And so furthermore, there were no black people. And I had to get back here because I was missing the parallel road that I traveled. Yes. The theater was there, the activism wasn't.
Right.
And that was my blood. Back I came to Nova Scotia. I did the activist work because, you know, working with the black inmates and all like that, but also worked with the federal government in the employment division and all like that. But that was at the time when those big programs were started. LIP, Local Initiatives Program, LEAP, OFY, Opportunities for Youth. These were these programs set up to funnel money into projects. All the theaters came into being at that time.
Right.
Neptune Second Stage, Pier 1 Theater, Theater 1707, all these things. In Toronto, Tarragon and Factory, and because you get LIP grants to start a theater or to run a theater.
Right.
Well, you know.
Well, I feel like you've brought me to the point where it would be remiss as the AD of Neptune Theatre not to start talking about Neptune. But I do want to pause again because we've had some more messages come in. Here's one. Greg Solomon. Walter treated me with such kindness on stage at Theatre Aquarius in A Few Good Men. I could gab with him for days on end.
Oh, Greg.
Adam Reed, he was an usher in Toronto. Adam, of course. Hi, Adam. Good to see you. Had the incredible pleasure to watch Walter perform nightly in The Adventures of a Black Girl in Search of God. It was a blessing each night, a gift, and one of my fondest theater memories. We have now I don't know who WLLM. Hi, Walter. Jerry Atan is in the house.
Jerry.
and Peter as well. Hi, Peter.
Peter.
There we go. So, if you're okay to keep talking.
Oh, yes.
Now, yes, I see Neptune in our sites now. So here you are. So I know that you worked on the second stage first. Explain how that was set up back in those days.
Well, a second stage, and Neptune had just started it. Was It was in the rooms up above where the old Seahorse Tavern used to be. The rooms up there.
Oh yeah.
And we did a Satyricon. Well, I mean, anybody who knows that play knows that. I mean, Neptune was then, I mean, with their second stage, really stepping out, because that's a play and a half.
Who was the AD at that time, Walter? Who was the AD at that time?
Oh no, this is before John's time.
Okay. I should know the order, but
it will come to me. But yeah. But that's where I met Hank White,
right,
and Ian Deacon.
Oh, Ian Deacon.
In that, yeah. And so I did that for Neptune, and at the same time, I did a number of things for Pier 1.
Oh yes.
John Dunsworth was running Pier 1 Theatre then. Had started. Yes. And we did some wonderful, crazy stuff there. And gone now. It was on Brunswick Street at the foot of Cornwallis. Gone now. But then I went fully into activist work, and I was working for the Black United Front, doing their communications work, and I was given the little task, or took on the task, to go to a gathering at Neptune where John Neville was being introduced, because he was going to assume the mantle,
right?
And from John Wood,
right?
And so we're upstairs in the where the bar used to be in the good old days.
Yep.
And I'm listening to John talk and all like that. Now, at that time, Neptune was in rehearsal for Man in the Moon Marigolds, with Odetta playing the mother. And that's when I first got to meet Odetta. But I said to John, I just said, Mr. Neville, we're sitting up here and we're listening to a play being rehearsed downstairs, Van Marigold. And my only question for you is, are we watching something that is a fly-by-night thing, or does this mean something? Because it was an all-black cast.
Right.
And he said, your name is? I said, Walter Borden. He said, Walter, I'm not a fly-by-night person. I said, that's nice to hear.
Yeah.
He said, I have several adopted children who look just like you. And I did it before. My wife and I did this before it was the thing to do. Fine with me. Fine with me. A whole year went by. And periodically, I might see John on the street or something, because he was really into getting to know what's going on in the community.
Yeah.
And now he was in full swing. So in 1979, I get a call. And it's John. And he said, Walter, they tell me you're an actor. He said, well, yeah. And he said, why didn't you ever tell me? And I said, well, because I was wearing a different hat,
Yeah.
you know? And he said, well, tell me, how would you like to be in The Taming of the Shrew? How would you like to play Biondello?
All right.
I said, fine. And that was the first go round of The Taming of the Shrew. And that's where I then met what I call the gang. Now,
Yeah.
I had met Ian before, but we hadn't seen each other. So Ian, Bill Carr, Barry Dunn, John Dunsworth, Nicky Lipman, the whole gang of us, Denny Doherty, was in The Taming of the Shrew. It was incredible.
I should say for people watching, in an ideal non-pandemic world, I would now throw up a collection of photos from that production. And unfortunately, the Neptune archives are all in the Nova Scotia archives on Roby and University, and so we didn't have access this week. But I managed to find in the Neptune boardroom a large number of programs of shows that Walter was in. So if he mentions a show, I'm going to bring up an image here just to. It's always cool to see some names on there as well. So yeah, there we are, The Taming of the Shrew.
It was so good. It was so good that they brought it back the next year and ran it in a rep with Much Ado About Nothing.
Ah,
And Susan Wright, great Susan Wright was in that.
mm-hmm.
And of course, John played Petruchio, and it was heaven. And then for a whole, that was my real, walking into Neptune, and from then until 2000,
Mm-hmm.
it was just so many.
Yeah.
But see, the interesting thing there was when that parallel path that I'm talking about, the artistry and the activism, that took root.
Mm.
Neptune was the place. It played such a huge role in what my job was in terms of what I was responsible for doing in life. The thing that stood out for me arriving at Neptune was that I was the only one there. And as a matter of fact, for a number of years thereafter, I knew that I was the only professional Black actor east of Montreal. What did that mean? For me, it meant something is terribly wrong. How else could an activist think? I mean, I was schooled in it then. So that defined what job I had to do.
Right, because you're an activist, you're an educator, you're an artist. So those three things together, I guess I'm kind of setting you up here, and I shouldn't have interrupted, but I can feel it. So what did you do? What was that job then?
I had an image in my mind. One day I was standing on the stage at Neptune on the early days by myself, and I thought, I want to look up here and see a whole bunch of me's. How am I going to do that? Well, I knew what the musical prowess was in the community, but I also knew that there were actors out there.
Mm.
I knew it. Why did I know it? Back in 1967, Evelyn, dear Evelyn, started the first Black theater in this province, the Inglewood Community Players. And I was there with her because she asked me if I'd help her. Evelyn had a play to do. It was called Coming Here to Stay, about Blacks arriving via the Underground Railroad, written by a friend of hers. Evelyn took herself down to Inglewood, Nova Scotia, which is just there in Bridgetown, got to know the whole community and decided to put the whole community into this play. And she did. That was in 1967, and it was a tremendously, really big hit. Entered into the Dominion Drama Festival, won a whole bunch of awards. It was taken to Toronto and Montreal. So I knew the potential was there.
Yeah.
Again, in 1969, when she was at Acadia, as she used this same company, the Inglewood Community Players, to stage James Baldwin's Blues for Mr. Charlie to tremendous success. My point being that when I got there at Neptune, I wanted others to have this opportunity. But I was particularly interested in those coming behind me, the next generation. I knew that there was a theater school at Dalhousie. Okay, how am I going to get them in there? What I did was that in 1983, again, with the help of the Nova Scotia Project, because I was still working with them, we formed Quatcha Playhouse, which made us a Black theater. I chose to do a musical. Why? Because I could bring the musical talent in, but because it was staged this way, it wasn't a musical per se. It was a series of poems written by James Weldon Johnson called God's Trombones.
Right.
So I took those, which is 7 sermons and a prayer. The sermons were these long pieces written in the vernacular of the old Black preachers. And I took those pieces and put music to it, all through it. Yeah. Got Odetta to come here to be in it. But Troy, Jeremiah, and his brothers, and everybody was in God's trombone. That's where they started.
Yeah.
So this would give them the opportunity not only just to sing, but it was all call response. The choir really had to act too.
Yes.
And we did that, and oh my God, tremendously successful. But that endeavor didn't go, of course, the way I wanted it to because of so many other side issues that I had to see corrected before I could get my vision in action. In other words, I put it like this. We did that God's Trombones at the Round Church at the corner of Cornwallis and Brunswick. The aim was to get from the corner of Cornwallis and Brunswick to the corner of Sackville and Argyle. It took 15 years.
Right.
But it arrived with Gospel at Colonus.
There it is.
And it was the perfect timing. Neptune had just been rebuilt.
Yes.
Linda was there, Linda Moore. Linda wanted to do this because she had spoken with another friend of ours, Woody Woods, because I had said, in order to do this, I need a Black musical director.
Right.
Must have. And they combined, they brought this together. Well, anybody who saw it knows what it was. It was beyond. As a matter of fact, I've been asked many times by other people outside of here who are knowledgeable about Gospel at Colonus, and they wondered why it was so successful here but not in America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'll tell you why. It was the approach.
Right.
Gospel et Colonus, for those who don't know, is the story of Oedipus returning home to die in Colonus. And then it's, Oedipus's whole story is blinding himself and all that kind of thing. And there is the preacher Oedipus, and there is the speaker Oedipus telling the story with these other people. And the main background of it is this choir that has to be a spectacular choir because of the music that was done. I mean, so we had Jackie Richardson and Jerry Brown, Troy. I mean, everybody, Frank McKay. It was glorious. And I said the reason it didn't work was because in the big productions in the States, and I saw one on television, they had magnificent performers, so big that everybody ended up doing a cameo. So there was no homogeneity in telling the story. It was just like going and watching a variety show where this one came out, that one, you see. Here, it was hit from the point of view that you were in this church. Now, everybody who was in the play here just knew what it was like to be in the black church. Mm-hmm. Many of them were from there. So mm-hmm. It was like coming into church to do this thing at which the preacher Oedipus was brought in to deliver this sermon in a Pentecostal church. So it was ideal for here, ideal. And I got what I wanted because on the day that we had our first dress rehearsal, the day before, we're on stage rehearsing, and I just went down into the audience and I looked up and I thought, okay, there was one, look at this, 30-something there.
Yeah.
I
think it's on record as being the largest company of performers, artists on stage as well at Neptune.
Oh yeah, it was huge. It was huge, but it didn't seem like that. But it was, you know. But for me, then I had completed a little task.
Yes.
I had, you know, and it's always been completing tasks.
Yeah.
Always.
Where did you? So that was Neptune's 35th season.
Mm-hmm.
We're now we're now at the 57th season. So you know it's over halfway in Neptune's life. I've got a few images. I've got a few program images here. I want to bring them up and just get you to just comment on each one, if you don't mind. It's almost like a spot.
Love it.
Apologize. And I haven't shown Walter many of these beforehand, but let's see. And again, I wish I had photos rather than just the program covers. But here's one. Shine
Boy, 1986. That was so important. So important. A play written by a black playwright from here, George Boyd, about a character, a person who was born here, George Dixon, the George Dixon Center, which is 3 minutes away from me up there, named after him, the great boxer. And George wrote this play. Richard Ozunian was here then.
Yeah.
And it was the first black production written by a black playwright, filled with the artists from here. It was a very important moment and a beautiful piece of work, which,
Yeah.
oh,
I think someone sent me a note a month or so ago. I think it was a Neptune employee said, you should dig out Shine Boy and have a look. And I think I really want to read it. I've never read it. Here's another one for you, Walter. Angels in America.
Angels in America. Oh, we did that up at Rebecca Cohen because Neptune was being rebuilt then.
Oh, that's right.
That was a beautiful production. Oh, was it Cliff Lejeune?
Yeah, I got the program here. We had Brian
Shelley.
Yeah, Robert Doyle was the costume designer. Nikki Littman was in that with you. Shelley Thompson.
Yes.
Tom Barnett and Cliff. So there we go. What a great cast as well.
It was and of course, as you know, Angels of America is a huge production, and it was staged so beautifully. My God! And of course, because it was on the Cohen stage, we had space.
Yeah,
you know?
double the space of the Neptune, at least double the space of the Neptune stage.
Oh yeah.
Here's another one for you. And now this one I've chosen because it's got a picture of you on the cover, so we actually get a bit of an image of you here.
Gideon's Blues. That's also by George Boyd.
Yeah.
And
that one's got a year on it. It's 1990. I can't read it. Is it 1998? Oh, here it is. 96.
Yeah. And of course, that's the second time that Gideon's Blues was done. It was done several years earlier in the old Canard Street School Theatre.
Right.
And then Linda brought it back and did it at Neptune, and George had time to do some rewriting, but it was a very important piece. And Jackie Richardson was in that, and Jackie always talks about that. That's the play that brought her to Halifax for the first time. Yes. And she's like she considers like Halifax as her adopted home, but that was the beginning. Gideon, yes.
I hope Troy Adams is watching or will watch this, because I wish I could show you all Troy Adams' headshot from the. He is. I don't know how old he is in this shot, and he and I have worked together a couple of times. He's so sweet, and I'll send it to you.
Yes.
Headshot in the world. Lucky Campbell as well.
Lucky, definitely.
Doug Guinness. Yeah, great. And Karen Robinson was in that.
Yes.
Directed by Richard Donat.
Yes.
There we go. We've these shows, Walter, normally last anywhere from half an hour to an hour. I knew that I would not want to stop listening to you talk. I feel like at some point I should just invite you back to keep going, and we'll talk some more and record these stories. It's so important to hear these stories of our industry and of your life and of the theater, so that we can learn from them, we can grow, and we can honor those stories. There's a few more messages come in. So I just want to make sure I get to them. Julia Williams. My first season as an usher. Thanks.
That's right. Yes.
Amanda Campbell wants to say that this is theater history we should all know. I agree. Thanks so much for sharing this. I'm learning so much. Tracy is here as well. Borden. Love the early days at Neptune. And of course, Tracy's on our board now.
Exactly.
Lisa, so interesting and how timely. Thank you. Love you, Walter. And Julia Williams wants Troy Adams' headshot too. Oh, maybe she just wants the program for. But excellent. I think I've got time for one more. Tell me about Hosanna.
Hosanna. Hosanna. Ah, that was special. Jeremiah, myself, and I played Hosanna. Jeremiah played Curette, and Richard Donat directed us.
Mm-hmm.
It was oh, it was one of those experiences that has such a huge and special place. What is interesting about that is seeing that again. I met an actor. I acted with a young actor in 1995 at Neptune in Romeo and Juliet. Frank Sauter, he played Romeo. I had met Frank without knowing I had met him several years before when he was a student at National Theatre School. But this is the first time that we really connected, and we remained friends ever since. Frank just got his Master of Fine Arts at UBC, and the work that he chose to do was around which he wrote his thesis was Hosanna, the development of the character and all that. And he knew that I had played Hosanna all those years ago, back in 1998. And so we would talk about various things while he was preparing to do that work for his degree. And and the second part of his thesis was to have a seminar on an actor, on a person who had mentored him and shaped his artistic life. And he chose me because of many things, but also because of the piece he was doing and the fact that he knew that I had done it. It was like bookending the pupil playing the role that the teacher had played, and how the pupil now saw the role, and how the teacher had affected his approaching the role now. It was a great honor. It was a great honor, and I found it still kind of strange, actually, because being very much of my sign, Cancer, Cancerian sign, the crab. The instinct is to run, scurry away, and hide under the nearest place of solace, and peer out from there and see what's going on. And that's really how I felt about the whole thing. But at the same time, had to realize suddenly, quite clearly, a number of things. All those years had passed. It's the same when speaking about any of the shows that we've talked about there. And I can remember, literally, rehearsing every one of them. And I know, and what was going on precisely at that particular time in my life.
Yes.
But although I can just, you can hold up a brochure there and I'll look at it, oh yeah, blah, 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 and then stop and say, oh my God, like that was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And yeah. So it was the same with dealing with Frank's gesture, beautiful gesture. Where did the time go? But I guess it has gone, hasn't it? But there's still work to do.
Yeah. the time still goes. I wanted to just reference a couple of things here, Walter, at the risk of embarrassing you. And I'm hoping this is up to date. You were awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Golden Jubilee Medal, the African Nova Scotia Music Association Music Heritage Award, the Portia White Prize from the Nova Scotia Arts Council for significant contribution to culture and the arts in Nova Scotia, the Martin Luther King Jr. Achievement Award in 2006 for your contribution to African Canadian arts and culture, and you were named a member of the Order of Canada in 2006, and in 2007 you were named a Doctor of Civil Law by St. Mary's University. I have a photo here. I'm hoping that this is Order of Canada. Is that correct?
No, that's for the Order of Nova Scotia.
Oh, okay.
In 2014. Okay.
I found the photo and it didn't have a caption on it, so but it looked appropriate. But there you are, looking very happy. I feel that I want to keep talking to you, but we're gonna wrap it up there. I know that I know because I've done the show so many times now, and I have a little scrolling counter that tells me how many people are watching, and people are watching and listening, and from the messages that I've been getting, loving seeing you and hearing you and knowing that you're here in Nova Scotia right now is great. I had the amazing good fortune to invite you back to Neptune because it had been too long.
20 years.
Yeah, and that was just silly, in my opinion. And I hope that when we get back at work, that you will come back again, and we'll be able to chat and find a project that excites you and interests you, and lets us continue your work. I want to thank you for being here and giving.
Oh, it's been a joy.
It really is. So it's been so lovely to listen and to hear you speak. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Walter, hang tight while I say goodbye to everyone. Don't go anywhere, because I'll say goodbye to you off camera in a second. Thanks for watching this amazing edition, I think, because of our guest of Off the Leash. More to come over the next couple of days, and then another week or so of shows before we pack it in for the summer and reevaluate this show's place in our lineup and how we continue on. We hope you stay in touch with Neptune, and we hope that you stay safe out there as Halifax starts to reopen with distancing, physical distancing. Let's all do it. Eating in a restaurant today that clearly weren't in the same bubble and looked a bit dangerous to me, but anyway. But so thank you, Walter. Thank you. I'm going to play the end credits. I also want to thank Support for Culture for their ongoing support of our show and of Neptune Theatre. We couldn't do it without you. And thank you to everyone that's been commenting and watching. And oh, look, Troy Adams was watching.
Troy.
Oh, and actually, Kat says if Joan Gregson she better she would want to send her love to you, so I will for her. That's so nice.
Yes, indeed.
All right, I'm so bad at ending shows because I never want them to end. I so enjoy them. So good night, Walter. Stay exactly where you are.
Okay, Jeremy.
Bye-bye.